started. We begin this afternoon with the big threat to the United States, the People's Republic of China. If you missed last night's Democratic Party debate, here's a little bit of a taste of what you may have missed. They steal our products. That's from U.S. Senator Kamala Harris. They're stealing our intellectual property. That's a quote from former VP Joe Biden. And the statements of both these candidates echo that of U.S. President Donald Trump, who has asserted that the Chinese government has pulled off, quote, the greatest theft in the history of the world. Joining me now is Professor of Economics Richard Wolff, author of Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown, with whom I'd like to jump right in because there's never enough time for all the insight this guest has to offer. Now, Professor Wolff, I want to start with what's become a commonplace allegation of these, quote, forced technology transfers in regards to China. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, although I need to begin by saying shame on Harris and shame on Biden. All they're doing is enabling Mr. Trump to pursue this war. One of the reasons he's designated China as a target is that it gets him free of any criticism by these Democratic candidates. And that's a sad commentary on American politics. But let's go to the nub of the question. The Chinese economy has been growing 3 times faster than the United States for the last 30 years. The standard of living of the average Chinese worker, while still below that of the United States by a good bit, has been growing much, much faster than anything that the average American worker experiences. The problem of the United States is that the Chinese have figured out how to do the thing that is of most urgent need of the people of this world, which is to stop being poor and to become comfortable and to have a modern industrial economy. They are doing that. They are the ascending power in the world. Everybody knows that, and that means they challenge the United States. And so, yes, we are now going to be designating them, not because they're the bad guy, that's kind of silly ideological stuff, but because our dominance, the dominance of the United States, which has been in existence roughly a century, is now heading down. That is a serious problem that is going to upset the American people. And the question is, what kind of leadership are we going to have? Is it an attempt to stop history, to pretend that we can slow down what is happening to a country that is 4 times larger than this one in terms of population? Or are we going to come to some live and let live arrangement with them?
You know, it's significant, and you've spoken about this in the past. You've said that even in the worst years for China, it's still doing about 2 times of the growth in terms of productivity as the economy of the United States. I want to talk a little bit and get your insight about why that is. Is this just due to the fact that, you know, you could say that, hey, China is more of a developing economy, right? Whereas the U.S. is an advanced industrial economy. It's just natural for us to be growing at a slower rate because we're at a higher stage of progression. Or does this have a bit more to do with the higher degree of central planning? What's your take?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I would stress that what you have in China is a formula. They have a large part of their economy in the hands of private capitalists. They have a large part of their economy in the hands of the government. And they have a communist party that coordinates what the government does by way of regulation. When you put all that together, they grow faster than we do. They produce more. They are now challenging the United States in one new technology after another. This is not an accident. It hasn't happened for a short time. And it isn't only to be explained because they are poor and they are backward. Most of the countries in the world are poor and backward, but they have not adopted what the Chinese have. They're not governed by a strong communist party. They are not coordinating both the private and the public sector in the way that they are. And that's why they are a challenge. It's not that they're a difficulty for us militarily at this point, but they are the model for what most of the people, and by the way, most Americans would like to have more comfort, more wealth, more security in order to fall back on it in a rainy day, etc. And the Chinese are showing us how to do it, and that's an embarrassment for the country that once prided itself on being that role model for the rest of the world, and it's being pushed out of that position by a new society.
Now, China, in becoming, this new role model for the world, made the decision some time ago to become an export economy, right? Similar to what the Russians did. And this is, you could say, hey, there's forced technology transfer, or you could say, hey, this was a strategy where it offered the West, cheap labor in exchange for technology and access. Can you talk a little bit about the decision China made after the financial collapse of 2008 to kind of insulate itself from what might happen to the U.S. economy?
Yes, and you've touched on many of the important things. What the Chinese did is they made an offer to capitalist companies around the world, Japanese, European, American, and Canadian, and so on as well. You can use our much lower wage workers than you pay in your country. We will make those workers available to you. You can come here and access the Chinese market, one of the most rapidly growing markets in the world, a population, again, 4 times larger than the United States. That's why so many companies went there. But the Chinese are not giving away gifts. The Chinese said, here's the deal. You get the cheap labor, you get the access to the Chinese market. We want your developed technology. You don't have to come here. You don't have to make this deal. That's why when Harris and others gratuitously mumble about theft of technology, what are you talking about? That was a deal entered into by one corporation after another because each of those corporations saw profit from getting access to the cheap labor and to the market, and they were willing to pay that price. As to questions of intellectual theft, every jurisdiction in the United States has cases right now in which various people are stealing secrets, business secrets, from one another. The Chinese have no monopoly on it. The Chinese don't do it arguably any more than anybody else. Do they do some of it? You bet. So does everybody else. And now the last point. After the crash of 2008, the Chinese learned a bitter lesson. They had built their industrialization on producing exports. That's why we all wear Chinese clothes and use Chinese appliances in our homes and all the rest. But they realized that put them at risk. If the Western capitalist societies fell apart, which they did in 2008, there went their market. So they've been busy shifting to make the Chinese economy more inward focused, more focused on serving the Chinese workers, which is one of the reasons they raised the wages of those workers so they could pay for it. And the irony of ironies is that by Mr. Trump making a war on China, the government is having an easier time going through the difficult transition from an export economy to a domestic economy because they can make it a matter of national pride. We are not going to be dictated to by the West, by Mr. Trump, and we're going to get through this difficult period. They would have had a difficult period anyway, but Mr. Trump, in his misguided, aggressive response, has actually made that difficult transition easier for the Chinese than it would have been otherwise.
So you just explained that in China these wages have been rising. In the U.S., it's no secret that, in addition to stagnant wages, we've had worker protections slowly diminishing. Is it any different in China?
Yes, I mean, they're an ascending society. They've had a lot of labor troubles in China. It's pretty well known. They have a long way to go. The working people in China have to fight in order to get a better deal. They have employers, and they have employers who want to make money, both private ones and government ones. So workers have to push. But one of the reasons they're getting a better time of it is because they're an ascending economy. It was easier after World War II, for example, for the American capitalists to give American workers rising wages because we were the only one that came out of World War II in a good situation. We were kind of serving the whole world, rebuilding the world after the war. We had a lot of profits, and we could give some to workers. Now that the American capitalism has bottomed, or in a sense can't go up the way it once did, it's getting more and more harsh with its workers. But The flip side is the Chinese are in a position to give more, and that's going to become very painful for Americans as they begin to see the fruits of that difference playing out in the different way they're treated here and those workers get treated there.
Now, finally, I want to ask you about Hong Kong, where a widespread protest movement has been taking place since the beginning of June against the government, but really also against the central government in China, as we see more and more every day. Now, some see the situation in Hong Kong as kind of being fueled a bit by the government here in the United States, where they're using the situation in Hong Kong as a way to not only, demonize the People's Republic of China in the eyes of the international community and divide public opinion about China, but also to perhaps slow the inevitable growth of this state as a result. Do you see something like Hong Kong as having the ability to do that, or is it just at best going to maybe delay what's an inevitable rise by this country?
It's quite clear to me that it will at best delay it. Look, there's something we can know, much we can't know, but here's what we know. Is the West making use of it to make anti-Chinese propaganda? Of course. But is there something really going on there in the way of dissatisfaction of large numbers of citizens in Hong Kong with their whole situation? That seems to be obvious to me anyway, as true as well. In order for the West to make something of something, there has to be something there, and the Chinese have a problem in how they have dealt with that. Now, it's partly understandable. Hong Kong and Macau are these bizarre Western enclaves in China for virtually the entire 20th century. And this is only a few years that we have for the mainland, China, Beijing, to integrate China. And I think you're seeing that the level of civil liberties and other kinds of freedoms in Hong Kong are something that they don't quite have yet in the rest of China. And they want to kind of work something out here. But this is one thing I can be clear to you about. The Chinese have a long history of a proud civilization. They were humbled in the 19th and 20th century when Western colonialism came there. They made revolutions across the 20th century to be sure never again to be subject to that kind of control, that kind of exploitation and humiliation. They are not about to permit it now, and they're stronger now to make sure that doesn't happen than they have been for centuries. That's why Hong Kong is a temporary phenomena. It will not change the broad outlines of what we're seeing.
Right. I mean, it's undoubted. It's not to be doubted that 1 in 5 people live in poverty in Hong Kong. That number becomes 1 in 3 for the elderly. So, of course, there are certainly legitimate grievances that we can only exploit. We definitely can't create. But perhaps, if what you're telling us about China is true, then perhaps the irony is that with less autonomy and with a higher degree of central planning in Hong Kong, there would actually be less inequality. I'm actually being told that we have to wrap it here, but Professor of Economics Richard Wolff, you can find his work at democracyatwork.info. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you.
So you haven't heard that we're the ones covering the stories that you won't see covered anywhere else? In Venezuela, Kazakhstan. Let's go to Hong Kong. And the media reaction to that has been crickets. How about the way we cover those stories? What the hell does that mean? Wally. That's the key word in this case, uprising. Keep? Can you believe that? Watching. This is the right thing for members of the media to do, to actually pick sides. Look, if you like what you see, subscribe.